My family kicked me out of Thanksgiving dinner because I chose to spend $900 on fixing my house instead of funding my sister's luxury wellness retreat, calling me selfish and unsupportive. But they forgot I'd been quietly covering their grocery bills, utilities, and car payments for the past 3 years. So I made one simple decision. And what happened next showed them exactly what unsupportive really looks like. Let us know in the comments where you're watching. If this resonated, don't miss out on subscribing because tomorrow I'm sharing something that will completely change how you think about this topic. Hi, I'm Natasha. I'm 31 years old, a single woman living in Millbrook, and until this Thanksgiving, I thought family meant having each other's backs. I work as a medical technician at Riverside General Hospital, pulling double shifts and weekend overtime to make ends meet. I'm not rich by any means, but I've learned to budget every dollar and save where I can. My story isn't about being ungrateful or vindictive. It's about the moment I realized that being the responsible one in the family had turned me into everyone's personal ATM, and how one $900 decision to prioritize my own needs finally opened my eyes to years of manipulation I'd been too blind to see. To understand how this all exploded, you need to know about my family dynamics. I'm the middle child of 3 daughters. My older sister Camille is 34, married to a guy named Derek who works sporadically in construction. They live in a nice apartment in downtown Millbrook, but Derek's work is unreliable, and Camille has never held a steady job for more than 6 months. She's always chasing the next opportunity. Multi-level marketing schemes, online courses, life coaching certifications that cost thousands but never seem to generate income. My younger sister Brianna is 26 and still lives with her parents in their small house on Oakwood Street. Brianna works part-time at a local coffee shop, but spends most of her money on what she calls self-care, expensive skincare products, yoga classes, organic everything. She's convinced that if she just finds the right combination of wellness practices, her life will magically transform. Then there are my parents, Robert and Janet, both in their early 60s. Dad worked at the lumber mill for 30 years until they downsized 2 years ago. Now he does odd jobs when he can find them. Mom works part-time at a grocery store, but her hours keep getting cut. They're good people, but they've always struggled with money management, and retirement planning wasn't exactly their strong suit. And then there's me, Natasha, the middle child who somehow became the family's financial safety net without ever agreeing to the job. It started small 3 years ago. Dad's car needed new brakes, and they didn't have the money. I offered to help with a $200 loan that was supposed to be paid back in a month. That month turned into forever. Then, Mom's prescription medication got expensive when their insurance changed. Another $150 here and there. When Camille and Derek couldn't make rent one month, I stepped in with $800 to keep them from getting evicted. Each time it was presented as an emergency, a one-time thing, a temporary help until they got back on their feet. But temporary became permanent, and help became expectation. Before I knew it, I was covering their monthly grocery bills, $300, helping with utilities, $200, and occasionally throwing money at whatever crisis Brianna manufactured that week. I never complained because I love my family. I worked extra shifts, lived in a tiny apartment, drove a 10-year-old car, and ate ramen for dinner more nights than I care to admit. But I managed, and seeing my family stable felt worth the sacrifice. The problem was my house. Last year, I'd saved enough to put a down payment on a small fixer-upper on Pine Street. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, built in 1978 and showing every year of it. But it was mine, my first real investment in my own future, instead of everyone else's problems. By this fall, the house was becoming a money pit. The furnace was making concerning noises, the bathroom faucet had been dripping for months, and don't even get me started on the kitchen cabinet that had been hanging by one hinge since I moved in. I'd been putting off repairs because every time I saved money for house improvements, someone in my family had an emergency that seemed more urgent than my leaky pipes. But in early November, the furnace finally gave up completely. With winter coming to Millbrook, I couldn't postpone this any longer. The repair estimate was $900, money I'd been slowly saving for the past 6 months by skipping dinners out and buying generic groceries. The same week I got the furnace estimate, Brianna announced her latest life-changing plan. She'd found a wellness retreat in Colorado called Awaken Your Inner Goddess, a 10-day program that promised to transform her relationship with money, success, and self-worth. The cost? $1,200, not including travel expenses. "This is exactly what I need," she gushed to the family over Sunday dinner at Mom and Dad's house. "The retreat leader is this amazing woman who went from broke and depressed to running a $1 million business. She's going to teach us how to manifest abundance and break through our limiting beliefs about money." I bit my tongue. Brianna had attended 3 similar retreats in the past 2 years, each one promising to be the key to unlocking her potential. Somehow, despite all this abundance manifestation, she was still asking Dad for gas money every week.
"It sounds wonderful, honey," Mom said, "but that's a lot of money." "I know," Brianna sighed dramatically. "I've saved $400, but I need another $800 to make it happen. This retreat could change everything for me. I just know it." The room fell silent, and I felt every pair of eyes turn to me. This was the family dance I knew so well. Someone would present their need, everyone would look sympathetic but helpless, and then all eyes would land on Natasha, the family ATM. "What do you think, Nat?" Dad asked gently. "You've always been so good at helping us figure things out." I felt the familiar weight of expectations settling on my shoulders, but this time, something was different. Maybe it was sitting in my cold house every morning, wearing a jacket while I drank coffee because I couldn't afford to run the heat properly. Maybe it was the realization that I'd been putting everyone else's dreams and emergencies ahead of my own basic needs for years. "Actually," I said slowly, "I can't help with this one. I need to get my furnace fixed before winter really hits. It's going to cost $900. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Brianna's face crumpled. "But, Nat, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The retreat starts in 3 weeks. Your furnace can wait a little longer, can't it?" I stared at my baby sister, this 26-year-old woman who had never lived in her own place, never paid her own utilities, never faced the reality of choosing between heat and helping someone else chase their latest fantasy. "No," I said quietly, "it really can't." And that's when I learned that in my family, saying no to funding someone else's dreams was apparently a declaration of war. If you're loving what you're hearing, smash that subscribe button. It really keeps us going. All right, let's jump back in. My no to funding Brianna's retreat didn't just surprise my family, it apparently offended them to their core. What followed was 2 weeks of the most sophisticated guilt campaign I'd ever experienced. And I started to see just how manipulative my so-called loving family could be when their free money source suddenly developed boundaries. The first attack came from Mom the very next day. She called me at work during my lunch break, her voice trembling with what I now recognize as perfectly rehearsed disappointment. "Natasha, honey, I've been thinking about yesterday. I'm just so surprised by your attitude. Brianna has been struggling so much lately, and this retreat could really help her find her path. You know how sensitive she is." I sat in the hospital break room, still wearing my scrubs from the morning shift, exhausted from dealing with actual emergencies, people with real problems, not manufactured crises about self-discovery retreats. "Mom," I explained why I can't help this time. "My furnace is broken. It's November in Millbrook. I need heat. But surely you could put that off for a few more weeks, or maybe find a cheaper option. You're so resourceful, Nat. Brianna doesn't have your skills for managing money." There it was, the subtle compliment wrapped around a guilt trip. I was resourceful and good with money, which apparently translated to obliged to fund everyone else's poor decisions. "Mom, the furnace repair can't wait. And honestly, Brianna needs to learn to save for things she wants." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then Mom's voice got that edge it always had when I didn't immediately comply with family expectations. "I never thought I'd see the day when my daughter would choose house repairs over helping her sister achieve her dreams. But I suppose we all have different priorities." She hung up before I could respond.
The next assault came from Camille, who showed up at my house unannounced that Saturday morning. I was in my driveway, loading groceries from my weekly shopping trip, the generic brand everything I'd become accustomed to buying so I could afford to support everyone else. "We need to talk," Camille announced, stepping out of the car Derek had bought with money I'd lent them for transportation to job interviews. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. "About your attitude toward Brianna. Do you realize how much you've hurt her? She's been crying for 3 days straight." I stopped loading groceries and turned to face my older sister. Camille had always been the family diplomat, the one who smoothed over things when conflicts arose. But she was also the one who had perfected the art of making her problems everyone else's responsibility. "I haven't hurt anyone, Camille. I simply said I couldn't afford to fund her retreat because I need to fix my furnace. It's not about the money, Nat. It's about the principle. We're family. We support each other." I almost laughed. Support each other? When's the last time anyone in this family supported me? When I was working 70 hours a week to pay off your eviction notice? When I was eating cereal for dinner so I could cover Mom and Dad's grocery bills? Camille's face flushed. "That's different. We were in crisis situations. This is about Brianna's personal growth and future success. And my furnace isn't a crisis? Potentially freezing in my own home isn't important? You're being dramatic. You could always stay with Mom and Dad for a few weeks if it gets too cold." The audacity was breathtaking. I should give up my own home, move back in with my parents like some failure-to-launch adult, so my 26-year-old sister could attend a luxury retreat to manifest abundance? "Camille, I'm not giving up my home so Brianna can go to Colorado and learn about manifesting money from someone who's taking $1,200 from broke people." "You've changed, Nat. Ever since you bought that house, you've become selfish. Money has made you cold." "Money?" I wanted to scream. "What money? The money I earned working double shifts while she tried to sell essential oils on Facebook? The money I saved by driving a car with 200,000 miles while she and Derek went out to dinner twice a week?" But I didn't scream. I just said, "I think you should leave." The pressure campaign intensified over the following week. Dad called to say he was disappointed in my lack of family loyalty. Brianna sent me a series of text messages that oscillated between heartbroken, "I guess I just don't matter to you anymore," and accusatory, "I never thought my own sister would sabotage my future." The manipulation reached its peak when Mom called to inform me that they'd decided to downsize Thanksgiving this year. "We're just going to keep it small," she said, with obviously fake casualness. "Just the core family. Camille and Derek, Brianna, me and your father." The message was clear. I wasn't core family anymore. I was a satellite, a supporting character who only mattered when my wallet was needed. "What about me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, honey, given your attitude lately, we thought it might be better if you took some time to think about what family really means. Maybe you could join us for dessert if you change your mind about helping Brianna." There it was, conditional love with a side of pie. But the final straw came 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was at work, halfway through a particularly brutal shift in the hospital lab, when I got a call from an unknown number. "Hi, is this Natasha? This is Gloria, Brianna's retreat coordinator from Awaken Your Inner Goddess." My blood ran cold. How did this woman have my phone number? "I understand there's been a confusion about your sister's payment plan. Brianna mentioned that you handle the family's financial decisions, and I wanted to reach out personally to discuss options." "I'm sorry, what?" "We really believe Brianna would benefit tremendously from our program, and I understand that $800 seems like a lot. But consider this. What's the cost of your sister remaining stuck in her current patterns? Surely her transformation is worth more than a few $100s to someone who clearly cares about family." I realized that Brianna had not only given the stranger my personal information, but had presented me as some kind of family financial manager who controlled everyone's money. The manipulation had gone beyond my own family and into their business relationships. "Ma'am,
I need to stop you right there. I am not responsible for my sister's financial decisions. If she can't afford your retreat, that's between you and her. Oh, Gloria's spiritual guru voice cracked slightly. I was under the impression that you were, well, Brianna said you always take care of these things for the family. Always take care of these things. Like I was the family accountant, rather than a woman who'd been guilted and manipulated into funding everyone else's life while neglecting my own. I hung up and sat in the hospital parking lot during my break, finally seeing the situation clearly. This wasn't about one $800 retreat. This was about a family that had decided my role was to sacrifice my own needs and dreams so they could pursue theirs without consequences. They'd turn my generosity into an obligation, my love into leverage, and my financial stability into their personal emergency fund. And when I finally tried to prioritize my own basic need for heat in my own home, I became the villain. As I sat there in my decade-old car, wearing scrubs that smelled like disinfectant from my second job, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I had become so busy taking care of everyone else that I'd forgotten to take care of myself. And apparently, the moment I tried to change that, I was no longer welcome at the family table. But what they didn't know was that I had been keeping track of everything. Every grocery bill I'd paid, every utility payment, every emergency loan that never got repaid. And if they wanted to exclude me from the family for refusing to fund Brianna's latest fantasy, they were about to learn exactly how much this selfish sister had actually been contributing to their comfortable lives. Thanksgiving was 2 days away, and I was about to give my family something to be truly thankful for: the opportunity to see how well they could manage without me. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a bitter cold snap that made my broken furnace situation impossible to ignore any longer. I woke up in my own house wearing 3 layers of clothing, my breath visible in the frigid air. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family was preparing for their core family-only Thanksgiving dinner in their warm, comfortable home that I'd been helping to heat for 3 years, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee with gloved hands.
I'd scheduled the furnace repair for the Friday after Thanksgiving, figuring I could survive one more cold night. But as I sat there in my freezing house, wrapped in blankets and trying to work up the energy to shower in what would inevitably be lukewarm water, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about being excluded from dinner anymore. This was about watching my family live comfortably off my financial support while simultaneously punishing me for daring to prioritize my own basic needs. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my banking app, something I'd been avoiding because I knew it would make me angry. But I needed to see the numbers clearly, needed to quantify exactly what my selfishness had cost me over the past 3 years. The grocery store charges for mom and dad, $10,800 over 3 years. The utility payments, when they came up short, $7,200. Camille and Derek's rent emergencies, $3,400. Brianna's various crises, car repairs, medical bills, investment opportunities that never panned out, $5,800. Miscellaneous family emergencies that somehow always became my responsibility, $4,200. $31,400. I had given my family over $30,000 while living in a house so cold I could see my breath indoors. My phone buzzed with a text from Brianna. "Hope you're enjoying your selfish Thanksgiving alone. Maybe next year you'll remember what family actually means." I stared at that message for a long time. Here was my sister, the one who'd never paid a bill in her life, lecturing me about family from the warm house I'd been helping to heat while she saved her coffee shop wages for wellness retreats and organic superfood smoothies. But it was the next text that broke something fundamental inside me. It was from Mom. "We're all here together, and there's definitely something missing without you. But I suppose you've made your choice. Brianna's still heartbroken about the retreat. It's not too late to change your mind and join us for dessert if you want to make things right." Make things right.
as if I was the one who needed to apologize, as if I was the one who had created the situation by having the audacity to prioritize my own housing needs over funding someone else's luxury vacation. I stood up from my kitchen table, walked to my bedroom, and opened the fireproof box where I kept all my important documents. Inside was a folder I'd labeled Family Financial Records, something I'd started keeping 2 years ago when the requests for money became so frequent I needed to track them for my own budgeting purposes. Every loan, every payment, every emergency contribution was documented. Bank transfers, Venmo transactions, cash withdrawals with notes about who received what and when. I'd been meticulous about it, partly because I'm naturally organized, and partly because some part of me had always known this day would come. I photographed every single document, every bank statement, every receipt. Then I opened my laptop and began typing. The message I crafted wasn't angry or emotional. It was clinical, factual, and devastating. To my loving family, since I've been excluded from today's celebration for being selfish and choosing to repair my furnace over funding Brianna's retreat, I thought this would be a good time to clarify exactly what my selfishness has looked like over the past 3 years. Attached, you'll find documentation of the $31,400 I've contributed to various family expenses and emergencies since 2021. This includes monthly grocery assistance, utility payments, rent emergencies, car repairs, medical bills, and numerous other temporary helps that somehow became permanent expectations. For perspective, that $31,400 could have fully renovated my house, estimated cost of $28,000, funded my own master's degree program, $15,000, built a substantial emergency fund for my actual emergencies, allowed me to take my first real vacation in 5 years. Instead, I chose to prioritize your comfort and stability over my own financial security and personal goals. I did this because I love you and wanted to help. However, I now understand that my contributions are viewed not as generous gifts from a daughter and sister who cares, but as obligatory payments from the family ATM. The fact that I'm being punished and excluded for finally saying no to one request makes this dynamic crystal clear. If choosing to heat my own home makes me selfish, then I accept that label. If prioritizing my basic needs over funding luxury retreats makes me unsupportive, then I'll own that too. Enjoy your dinner together. I hope the turkey is delicious, the conversation warm, and the house comfortable. You're welcome. Natasha. P.S. Since I'm no longer considered core family, I assume my financial contributions are no longer needed. I'll be adjusting my budget accordingly. I read it 3 times, attached the financial documentation, and hit send to the family group chat at exactly 2:47 p.m., right when I knew they'd be sitting down to eat. Then I turned off my phone, grabbed my purse and car keys, and left my freezing house. I drove to Millbrook General Hospital, where I knew the cafeteria would be serving a traditional Thanksgiving dinner for patients, staff, and anyone in the community who needed a warm meal and friendly faces. I'd volunteered there during past holidays, but today I wasn't there to serve. I was there to be served, to sit among people who understood what it meant to spend holidays with your chosen family rather than your biological one.
The cafeteria was warm, bustling with activity, and filled with the kind of genuine gratitude that comes from people who don't take basic comforts for granted. I sat at a table with Martha, an elderly woman whose daughter lived across the country, and Carlos, a young resident who was working the holiday shift. We talked about everything except family drama, and for the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely relaxed. "You seem lighter today," Martha observed as we shared a piece of pumpkin pie. "Like you've set down something heavy." I smiled, thinking about the message I'd sent and the inevitable explosion it was causing in my parents' dining room. "I think I have." When I finally turned my phone back on at 8 p.m., I had 47 missed calls and 23 text messages. The family group chat had blown up with a combination of
outrage, panic, and desperate backpedaling. Mom's messages ranged from hurt, "How could you ruin our Thanksgiving like this?" to angry, "This is completely inappropriate and embarrassing," to bargaining, "Maybe we can work something out." Camille had apparently appointed herself the family spokesperson, sending a series of increasingly frantic messages about how I was misunderstanding the situation and making this about money when it's about family bonds. But it was Dad's single message that told me everything I needed to know. "Natasha, we need to talk about this tomorrow. There are some numbers here that don't look right." Numbers that don't look right. After 3 years of gladly accepting my money, now they wanted to audit my receipts because I'd had the audacity to document their ingratitude? Brianna's messages were the most telling of all. "You're trying to make us look bad by throwing money in our faces. Real family doesn't keep score like this. You're being manipulative and cruel." Manipulative and cruel. I was being called manipulative for having clear records of my own generosity, and cruel for pointing out that their treatment of me didn't match their dependence on me. I read every message, every voicemail transcript, every attempt to rewrite the narrative of the past 3 years, and with each word, I felt more certain that I'd made the right choice. As I sat in my cold house that night, still wearing my jacket but feeling warmer than I had in months, I realized something important. I hadn't lost my family today. I'd simply stopped pretending that people who took my money while withholding their love were actually family in any meaningful sense. Tomorrow, I would deal with the fallout. I would listen to their attempts to justify the unjustifiable, their efforts to make me the villain in a story where I'd been the only one actually looking out for everyone's welfare. But tonight, I was finally free from the exhausting burden of being grateful for the privilege of funding my own mistreatment. And for the first time in 3 years, that freedom felt worth more than any amount of money I'd ever given them. The next morning brought a pounding on my front door at 7:23 a.m. I knew it would be Dad. He was always the one they sent in first when damage control was needed. I'd slept better than I had in weeks, despite the cold, and I took my time getting to the door. Let him wait. Let him stand on the porch I'd helped him keep through 3 years of mortgage assistance. When I finally opened the door, Robert looked older than his 62 years. His face was drawn, his usual easy smile replaced with the expression of a man who'd spent the night calculating just how much his comfortable life was about to change. "We need to talk," he said, holding a manila folder that I recognized immediately. He'd printed out every document I'd sent. "Good morning to you too, Dad. Come in, but fair warning, the heat's not working." He stepped inside and immediately pulled his jacket tighter. "Jesus, Nat, it's freezing in here. Why haven't you gotten this fixed?" The irony was so thick I could taste it. Because I spent the furnace repair money on Brianna's last emergency 3 months ago. Remember when her car needed new tires and she couldn't possibly ask for overtime shifts at the coffee shop? Dad's face flushed. He set the folder on my kitchen table and sat down heavily. "About these numbers you sent. What about them?" "Some of them seem inflated." I stared at my father, this man who'd raised me to believe that honesty was the most important virtue, as he sat in my kitchen questioning the accuracy of receipts he'd watched me pay in real time. Inflated how, exactly? He opened the folder and pulled out a bank statement. This grocery payment from last March, $467. That seems excessive for one grocery trip. That wasn't one trip, Dad. That was the week when Mom's hours got cut and you asked me to help out a little with food until her next paycheck. I bought groceries for both our households because you said things were tight. I don't remember it being that much. I have the receipts. Both of them. Would you like me to get them? He shifted uncomfortably and flipped to another page. And this payment to Camille for $800. You marked it as rent assistance, but I thought Derek had gotten that construction job. He had gotten the job. He got fired after 1 week for showing up late 3 times. Camille called me crying because they were going to be evicted. And you and Mom said I should help because family takes care of family.
Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring at the numbers that represented 3 years of his daughter working extra shifts so his family could maintain their lifestyle without consequences. The thing is, Nat, we never asked for this much help. That's when something inside me snapped completely. You never asked? Dad, you called me at work last Tuesday to ask if I could loan Mom $50 for her prescription. On Monday, Mom texted asking if I could pick up the electric bill because they were short this month. 2 weeks ago, Camille showed up here asking for money for Derek's truck registration. You might not have asked for $31,000 all at once, but you've been asking for pieces of it constantly for 3 years. That's different. Those were emergencies. Everything is an emergency with this family. Brianna's retreat was an emergency. Derek's truck registration was an emergency. Mom's prescription that she's needed at the same time every month for 2 years is somehow always an unexpected emergency. Dad rubbed his temples. Look, we appreciate everything you've done, we really do, but yesterday was harsh. Sending that message during Thanksgiving dinner, embarrassing your mother in front of Camille and Brianna like that? Embarrassing her? I embarrassed her by providing documentation of my own generosity? You made us look like we were taking advantage of you. I let that hang in the air for a moment, watching my father slowly realize what he'd just admitted. Dad, if documenting the help I've given makes you look like you're taking advantage of me, what does that tell you about the situation? Before he could answer, my phone started ringing. It was Mom. Then Camille. Then Brianna. The calls kept coming, one after another, each family member taking their turn at bat in what was clearly a coordinated effort to wear me down. I declined all the calls and looked at Dad. Let me guess, they're waiting in the car. He had the grace to look sheepish. They wanted to come in together, but I thought it would be better if I talked to you first. Better for who? 20 minutes later, my living room was full of my entire family, all wearing their winter coats because of the cold house. That perfectly illustrated everything wrong with our dynamic. They sat there shivering in the home I had been neglecting so I could keep their homes comfortable. And the symbolism was so perfect it was almost funny. Mom sat on my couch clutching a tissue box, her eyes red from what I assumed was a night of strategic crying. Camille had positioned herself as the family spokeswoman, her arms crossed in defensive mode. Brianna looked sullen and refused to make eye contact. Derek, for his part, seemed genuinely uncomfortable, probably because he was the only one honest enough to be embarrassed about the situation. Natasha, Mom began, her voice trembling with practiced hurt. I don't understand how we got to this point. We've always been such a close family. We are close. That's why this is so painful. Money shouldn't come between family. I looked around the room at these people I'd loved and supported unconditionally, watching them attempt to rewrite 3 years of history in real time. You're absolutely right, I said calmly. Money shouldn't come between family. So why did you exclude me from Thanksgiving dinner over it? That's not what happened, Brianna finally spoke up. You were excluded because of your attitude, not because of money. My attitude about what, Brianna? About not supporting my dreams. Your dreams that cost $800 that you expected me to provide? It's not about the money. Then pay for it yourself. The room fell silent. It was such a simple statement, but apparently revolutionary in the context of our family dynamics. Camille jumped in to fill the silence. Nat, we know you've helped us out over the years, and we're grateful. But you're acting like we forced you to do it. You offered. You wanted to help. You're right, I did want to help. But there's a difference between helping family in genuine emergencies and becoming a personal ATM for every want, wish, and poor decision you make. We don't treat you like an ATM, Mom protested. Mom, Brianna's retreat coordinator called my personal phone number because Brianna told her I handled the family's financial decisions. How is that not treating me like an ATM? Brianna's face went bright red. I never said that. I pulled out my phone and played the voicemail Gloria had left. The room listened in uncomfortable silence as the retreat coordinator's voice filled the space, talking about payment plans and how surely my sister's transformation was worth more than a few $100s to someone who clearly controlled the finances. When the message ended, Brianna mumbled, "I might have mentioned that you help out sometimes? You gave a stranger my personal information and presented me as your financial manager. Do you understand how that made me feel?" Derek, who had been quiet through the entire confrontation, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should talk about paying some of this back." The suggestion hit the room like a bomb. Mom immediately started crying harder. Camille shot Derek a look that could have melted steel. Dad cleared his throat nervously. "That's not necessary," I said quietly. "The money was given freely. I don't want it back." The relief in the room was palpable until I continued.
But I won't be giving anymore. Effective immediately, you're all financially independent adults who can handle your own emergencies, bills, and dreams. You can't just cut us off, Brianna exploded. We depend on that help. And there it was, the truth that no one had been willing to say out loud. They didn't just appreciate my help, they depended on it. Their comfortable lives, their ability to pursue dreams without consequences, their financial stability, it all rested on my willingness to work extra hours so they didn't have to face the reality of their own choices. "Brianna," I said gently, "if you depend on my money, then you were never financially independent to begin with. You were just living beyond your means with my subsidization." The meeting devolved quickly after that. Accusations flew about my selfishness, my coldness, my apparent transformation into someone who cared more about money than family. Camille accused me of holding grudges. Mom accused me of being vengeful. Brianna accused me of sabotaging her future. But Dad, who had been quiet through most of the chaos, finally spoke the words that confirmed everything I'd realized. "Maybe," he said slowly, "we did get a little too comfortable relying on Natasha's help." The room went silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It felt like the sound of a family finally hearing the truth about themselves. As they filed out of my cold house one by one, each muttering their own version of disappointment and hurt, I realized that the reckoning I'd expected would destroy me had actually done the opposite. For the first time in 3 years, I felt completely, genuinely free. The silence that followed my family's departure was unlike anything I'd experienced in years. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive quiet that comes after an argument. It was the peaceful stillness of a burden finally lifted. I sat in my cold living room for nearly an hour just breathing, feeling lighter than I had since the day I bought this house. The first thing I did was call the furnace repair company and move my appointment up to that same afternoon, paying the emergency service fee without a second thought. For the first time in 3 years, I was spending money on myself without calculating how it would impact my family's next crisis. The technician arrived at 2 p.m., and by 4 p.m., warm air was flowing through my house again. As the temperature gradually rose to a comfortable level, I found myself crying, not from sadness, but from the simple relief of being warm in my own home. I'd been so focused on keeping everyone else comfortable that I'd forgotten what it felt like to prioritize my own basic needs. The next few days brought a predictable pattern of communication from my family. It started with angry texts about my dramatic overreaction and manipulation tactics. When anger didn't work, they shifted to bargaining, suggestions for family meetings to work things out and find a compromise. By the end of the week, the messages had turned guilt-laden attempts to make me feel responsible for their upcoming financial struggles. Camille sent a particularly revealing text on Sunday. "Derek's registration is due next week, and we don't have the money. I guess we'll just have to let it lapse and hope he doesn't get pulled over driving to job interviews. Thanks for putting us in this position." I read it twice, marveling at the mental gymnastics required to make their lack of financial planning my fault. Then I deleted it without responding. The real test came 3 weeks later when Mom called crying about their heating bill.
It was higher than expected due to an early cold snap, and they couldn't afford to pay it and still buy groceries. The old Natasha would have immediately offered to help, working extra shifts to cover the difference while eating ramen for dinner. The new Natasha listened sympathetically and then said the words that would have been impossible for me to speak 6 months earlier. "That sounds really stressful, Mom. Have you looked into the county's utility assistance program? I think they help with exactly these kinds of situations." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Natasha, we're asking for your help." "I understand that, but I'm not in a position to help anymore." "Not in a position? You just got your furnace fixed. You obviously have money." "Yes, I have money that I earned and budgeted for my own expenses. That's how personal finance works when you're not subsidizing 4 other adults." She hung up without saying goodbye. Christmas that year was the most peaceful holiday I'd experienced in decades. Instead of driving myself into debt buying gifts for people who seemed to take my generosity as their due, I bought myself something I'd wanted for years: a membership to the Community Art Center where I could take pottery classes on weekends. I spent Christmas morning at the hospital again, this time officially volunteering to help serve dinner to patients and staff who couldn't go home for the holiday. Martha, the elderly woman I'd met on Thanksgiving, was back as a volunteer too. "You seem different," she observed as we arranged dinner rolls on plates. "Settled, like you've stopped fighting something." She was right. I had stopped fighting. Stopped fighting the impossible battle of trying to make selfish people grateful, of trying to buy love from people who were perfectly happy to take my money while withholding their respect.
The real change became apparent in January when I started receiving my first paychecks that weren't immediately allocated to someone else's emergency. I opened a separate savings account and watched it grow with a sense of wonder I hadn't felt since childhood. By March, I had enough saved to start the kitchen renovation I'd been dreaming about since I bought the house. The transformation wasn't just financial, it was emotional and social too. Without the constant stress of managing everyone else's crises, I had energy for my own life again. I joined a hiking group, started the pottery classes, and even went on a few dates with a man I met at the art center. For the first time in years, when people asked about my weekend plans, I had interesting answers that didn't involve working overtime to fund someone else's poor decisions. My family's attempts to reestablish the old dynamic continued sporadically throughout the spring. Brianna called in April, 6 months after the retreat deadline had passed, to tell me she'd learned to forgive my selfishness and was ready to rebuild our relationship. The call lasted exactly as long as it took her to realize I wasn't going to ask about her financial situation or offer to make up for the missed opportunity. Camille tried a different approach in June, inviting me to Derek's birthday party with the clear expectation that I'd arrive with an expensive gift and an envelope of cash, like I had for every family celebration for the past 3 years. I attended the party, brought a modest gift, and left early. The disappointment on their faces when I didn't slip Derek any money was almost comical. But the most telling moment came in August, when Dad had what turned out to be a minor heart episode, just stress and heartburn, but scary enough to land him in the emergency room for a few hours. Mom called me in tears, and for a moment I felt the old familiar pull to drop everything and rush to fix whatever needed fixing. I did go to the hospital. I sat with Mom while the doctors ran tests. I held her hand while she worried and cried. But when she started talking about the medical bills and how they'd manage the copays, I didn't immediately offer to cover them. I listened, I sympathized, and I suggested they speak with the hospital's financial counselor about payment plans. "But Natasha," Mom said, looking at me with the same confused expression she'd worn since Thanksgiving, "we thought you'd want to help." "I do want to help, Mom. I'm here. I came as soon as you called. I'll drive you home and pick up Dad's prescription. But I'm not going to pay your bills anymore." She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "I don't understand the difference." And that in one sentence summed up everything that was wrong with our family dynamic.
She couldn't distinguish between emotional support and financial exploitation, between being present for someone and being their personal bank account. The most unexpected development came in September, nearly a year after the Thanksgiving disaster. Derek called me directly. Not Camille, not Mom or Dad, but Derek himself. "Nat, I wanted to apologize," he said without preamble. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realized how messed up it all was. You worked your ass off to help all of us, and we repaid you by treating you like shit when you finally said no to something. I was so surprised I almost dropped the phone." "Derek?" "He started tracking our expenses after you cut us off, trying to figure out where our money was actually going. And I realized we were living way beyond our means because we always had you as a safety net. We never learned to budget or save or make hard choices because we knew you'd always bail us out." "How are things now?" I asked. "Hard," he admitted, "really hard. But also better in a weird way. Camille got a full-time job, I'm working steady construction, and we're actually living within our means for the first time in our relationship. We fight less because we're not constantly stressed about money we don't have." It was the first genuine conversation I'd had with a family member since the previous Thanksgiving, and it gave me hope that perhaps some relationships could be salvaged. As autumn returned and the first anniversary of my emancipation approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey. I'd lost the illusion of a loving, supportive family, but I'd gained something far more valuable: my self-respect, my financial security, and my peace of mind. The woman who had sat shivering in her own kitchen a year ago, afraid to prioritize her basic needs over her sister's luxury desires, no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood that true family doesn't keep you warm by making you cold, doesn't find comfort in your discomfort, and doesn't punish you for having boundaries.
My house was warm, my savings account was growing, and my life was my own again. I'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to experience the natural consequences of their choices. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. On Thanksgiving morning, exactly 1 year later, I woke up in my perfectly heated house, put on my favorite sweater, and headed to the hospital to volunteer. Martha was there again, and we worked side by side preparing meals for people who understood the value of kindness without expecting it to come with a price tag. "Same time next year?" Martha asked as we cleaned up. "Absolutely," I replied, and meant it. I'd finally found my real family, the people who showed up not because they needed something from me, but because they genuinely wanted to share the day with me, and that was worth more than any amount of money I'd ever given away. Next up, 2 more stories chosen just for you. If you enjoyed this, you'll want to see what's coming. Tap to keep going.